Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Management Reporter Series Part 3, all about cash flow. Appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to join us today. There are a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin the presentation. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can either raise your hand so we can unmute your line, or you can submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We'll answer questions throughout the presentation, as well as following up after the presentation to answer any additional questions. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We have both Philip Nichols and Tina Hare. They're both GP Principal Consultants here at Socius. So at this point, Philip, I believe we're ready to transition over to you.
Okay, Lindsay. Real quick, do you need to go through any of our dashboards here prior to my getting started?
Nope, you are good to go.
Okay, and of course, good morning, everyone. We're looking right now just at a couple of upcoming things here. We've got a smart list for data analysis, August 22nd, and some GP tips and tricks on August 7th. Those are upcoming, and you can, of course, check out our website for any of those. So let's go ahead and jump on in here. So today we're going to be looking at a basic cash flow statement. And this, of course, is a little introduction to that. The one I'm going to be doing is an indirect method cash flow as opposed to the direct method. So, of course, we're going to be looking at the inflows and outflows at a certain point in time. And using your cash flow, you can, of course, reconcile it back against your P&L and your balance sheet. And since we're doing blends of period activities and beginning and ending balances, this does get a little tricky, and there's a couple of things I'm going to be showing you to make it easier on you. And these will be some things that if you have been on either the balance sheet or the income statement webinars previously, these are some things that we actually haven't looked at yet, so it'll be some new information for you. And of course, we'll also be using some of the things you've already learned, and we'll look at those also. All right, so some of those things, now that I've brought them up, we're going to be looking at doing some non-print formatting for calculations in columns and rows. We're going to look at some row format account modifiers. Those are things that are used to override columns. And we're going to be looking at some advanced cell placements when calculating beginning balances. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to stop this right here for a moment because I want to actually jump on over and get into Management Reporter itself. All right, so here we are in Management Reporter, of course, and we're looking at our report definition. And this is, of course, the report definition for the cash flow that I have set up in my system. Minimize all these. And as you've seen before, of course, in Management Reporter, all of your reports are made up of a row and a column, and you can, of course, add trees if you need to give your reporting a little more definition. Now, the first thing I want to start with is actually showing you the column definition on this particular report. So I'm going to bring it up. Now, my first column, column A, is my description column. And I'm sorry, this seems to be, Lindsay, are you hearing that feedback again?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. All right, I heard a little bit on my end. All right, as with all of our column sets, we do need to have a description column, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your first column, but it does need to be on your report somewhere. Now, my very first column, I'm going to expand it a little bit here so you can see the entire header. There we go. So this is going to be my first column. It's a financial dimension column. It's going to be using my actual book, which means my GL numbers as opposed to my budget numbers. And as you remember, you can, if you have budgets in your system, you can choose those as opposed to your GL. Fiscal year is base, which is, of course, the base is the year I'm going to be running the report against, and the period is also base, which I'm going to be running the report against. And it's going to be it's periodic, which means it's a monthly report. Now, I've got some hidden columns here. I'm going to open those up, and we're going to look at those also. And these are, of course, you can use these types of columns on any report as you might need them, but they're especially important in doing this type of cash flow. Okay, the first one, my period one balance column. Now, this is also set up as a financial dimension, using the actuals. It's also set up to use my base fiscal year, my base period. However, for my periods covered, this one has a format of year-to-date/BB. So this is going to show you it's going to show you year-to-date amounts, but it's only going to be my beginning balances. Let me double click here. See, I've got 4 choices in here. I have periodic. I can look at periodic beginning balances. Of course, year-to-date, which you've seen before. In this instance, we're doing our year-to-date beginning balance. So that's going to lock that column into only showing my year-to-date beginning balances. You notice I've got this restriction on this column for non-printing because I don't want to see it when I generate the report. I just want to use it in a calculation. Right, our next column, column D. Let me make it a little bit bigger here. It's the year-to-date column. It's also set up to pull financial dimensions using actual book codes, again, base year, base periods, and it's set up to be a year-to-date column. I also have it as a non-printing column because it's going to be part of my calculation, which leads me to my final column, E, which is my calculated column. And this is a simple calculation. It's just column D, my year-to-date amounts, minus C, my year-to-date beginning balances. So this will give me the year-to-date without the beginning balance amounts in it. And you can, of course, like I said, you can use these types of columns at any time on any of your reports, depending on what you need to take out from your display when you generate the report itself. So let me go ahead and close that down. Nope, no need to save any changes because I didn't change anything. Now comes the great part, our row definition, and this is where most of your entire report is going to be happening. Okay, these are our rows, and since this is a cash flow, I have my 3 sections. I have my operating activities, my investing activities, and my financing activities. And I have these highlighted just to make the individual sections stand out. Now, if you want highlighting, you can add this in. If you don't want the highlighting, you can take it away. But this will cause, of course, certain sections of your report when you generate it to be highlighted. And that's pretty easy. Again, you're selecting the sections of your report. And just like you do in Excel, you have your fill buttons. Of course, then you have your font color buttons. And you can choose those as needed, and it will cause the entire section to fill in based on what you've highlighted. Okay, you see I've done some formatting here. I have my headers. They're, of course, bold already. I have my non-bolded information, and that, of course, carries down through the entire report. You notice that some of the rows, such as these 4 right here, have indents. And just like in Excel, you have your decrease and increase indent buttons that you can use to move those as needed. Here in our format code, we do have some formats that you'll recognize from the other webinars, such as our tote. Tote is, of course, used to add and subtract numbers. If you're doing any other type of calculation, such as division, multiplication, or if statements, you'll have to use the cal, which is a complex calculation code. But for what we're doing right now, we're going to stick with the totes. Here in our related formulas rows units, I think we've seen this before, but we'll revisit again. In this particular instance, this row is related to row 250. This row is related to 250 also. Notice row 250 is a total row. It's adding up 190 and 100. So 100 right here, 190 right here. By relating these 2 rows to this total row, if for some reason this total row is blank, then this will not show and this will not show. It's an easy way to hide things automatically and have them be dynamic based on totals within your report itself. And you'll notice this is done quite a bit through here, such as my header. Sources, uses of cash is related to row 580. 580 is, of course, my actual total. So if this total is blanked out, then this section is not going to print. It's going to disappear when I generate the report. In column F, we do have some C's, which are the normal balances. And as we saw when we were originally doing, I believe we looked at this on the balance sheet. If you do, when you pull in all of your accounts, let me do that real quick just to revisit that. We'll do a new report. Yes, we'll save this. Of course, I hit the wrong thing. Sorry about that. Just want to pull in a new row set real quick. And if you were in the very first webinar, you remember we were able to add all of our accounts using our insert rows from dimensions in our edit menu. And I'm just going to add everything in at the natural account level. So any account that has an automatic credit balance, the system goes ahead and applies in the normal balance column the C. You'll notice it's coming against like some of my contra accounts. I get further on down, some of my payables, further on down as I get into my sales, you'll notice all of those has a C as their normal balance because all of those accounts have a typical credit balance. And that's based on the way you set them up within GP itself. Now the reason I have them here, of course, at the very top, my net income from operations, that's a combination of my sales and my sales returns and discounts. So those normal balances need to be set as C in order for my calculations to complete correctly when I generate this report. Let's go on over. Of course, we have our print control, but we're going to want to see all these rows, so I don't have anything marked as non-printing right now. No column restrictions up here, no row modifiers up here. We slide on a little bit. Of course, in order to make the report a little bit easier, instead of coming in and doing lists of accounts, I'm doing this report by account categories. For those of you who have seen the other webinars, or for those of you who have not, again, we can pop this open real quickly. Anytime you're doing your dimensions in your reports, you of course can have choices doing by accounts, account categories, I can do departments, I can do divisions. These are all based on the account segments you have set up in GP, so your window when you open this may look a little different than mine. Again, I've chosen to use account categories, and these are of course the same account categories that you assign. When you're setting up your accounts in GP, you always give everything an account category, which of course this right here. And as you know, you have 48 built-in categories, but you can of course add in new categories of your own to this window as you need to, and you can have as many as you want. Okay, so let's flip back over here. So I've chosen of course the categories that I want to include in my income from operations. I'm doing my sales returns, my COGS, tax expenses, admins, any interest, other expenses, other income, salaries, my selling, and my tax. And you notice I've used my account categories actually down throughout the entire report. And I wish I had a little extra screen so we could see more of this. But of course, here I'm adding back in my non-cash expenses, which in my system is my depreciation expenses and any amortization that falls underneath that. And I've done categories all the way through here. I've done my accounts receivables, I've done my liabilities, which of course is quite a list also, just like our income from operations was. And you can of course, as you want to, you can do accounts, you can do combinations of categories and accounts when you're coming up with your calculations to go in your dimensions column here. Of course, as before, I've got various totals here for each of my sections. My cash flow is my net income, and my add backs, my uses of cash. I have those summed together. And of course, then I do my net cash flow from operating, which are the two totals. Cash flow from investing in my company is just my additions to fixed assets. You, of course, may have many more than that. Then I have my financing activity, which in my test company is my capital stocks, my paid-in capitals, any dividends paid, unrealized gains, loss, and my retained earnings. And again, I'm still using my account categories because in my particular system, it's much easier to use these account categories than to put in the multiple account number strings that would be necessary for this report. So we're going to scroll down a little more. There's my net decrease in cash. And of course, that's a combination of the totaling of my three sections: financing, interest, and operating. I'm sorry, investing and operating. Okay, now I'm going to scroll down a little more, and I have actually hidden some rows here, which I'm going to pull those up now so we can look at those, because these are some of the new things that we haven't used before. And these are things you'll have to use when you're actually generating your cash flow. All right, so the first thing I'm starting with is my cash at beginning of period section. Now you'll notice I have a row that I have typed in here, named it non-printing, then underneath it I have the same row, the cash at beginning of period. Now let's look at the non-printing row first. There's no formatting, nothing is related. But if you notice in my print control, this is a non-printing row. Because I want to use this row in a calculation, I just don't want to see it when I generate my report. Which leads us to these two columns, our row modifier, and of course our financial dimension. The financial dimension is easy enough. It's just my account category of cash. And that's just going to pull in every account that I have set up under the cash category. The big thing on this one is the account modifier of slender row is always going to show beginning balances. So every time I generate this report, regardless of what period I run this for, you're going to see a beginning balance. I'm going to double click on this because there's actually many account modifiers that you can use within your rows. And let's just look at some of the other ones. So you can actually lock rows down into particular periods or periods before or after. You can have it locked into current balances only, or you can have it locked into a year-to-date balance only. And if you're using, of course, budgets, you can actually lock rows into portions of budgets or to portions of your actuals. But all I need mine to do right now is just reflect the beginning balance. Okay, now underneath it, our second cash at the beginning of period row. Now this one has actually quite a few things going on. You'll notice it has a cal, and that of course is my complex calculation. So there's something more going on in this row besides just simple addition or subtraction. Now the calculation I have in here, it's pretty easy. It's B equals B.1180 and E equals C.1180. Now what that is doing is tying this row to columns. So I'm going to pull my column set back up real quick. Actually, I'm going to try to, if I can, let's see if I can't pull both of them at the same time here for you to see. There we go. Let's get our cash flow up here. We're going to spread it out a little bit. Then I want to look at my row definitions also. Just scroll down further. That's not the one I want to see. Give me just a moment here to get that pulled up for you. Come on. is fighting here. Give me just a moment. I think I closed something I shouldn't have earlier. Oh, sorry about that. All right, let's get you back open. Let's get you back open again. All right, so let's get our columns spread back out now that I have them open. There we go. Let me get back down to my calculation. Okay, again, the calculation, it's saying that B is equal to B 1180, E is equal to C 1180. Okay, the B in this instance is referring to column B here. The E is, of course, referring to column E. The 1180 in the calculation is referring right here to row 1180, your non-printing row. So what this tells the system, when you generate this report, column B will always show this calculation right here, the beginning balance for the cash at the beginning of period. Column E, however, remember column E is a calculated column, and it was a simple calculation of the year-to-date minus the beginning balance year-to-date. So for this row right here, the cash at beginning period, instead of showing just a D minus C calculation, it's going to be overwritten. Instead, column E is going to show whatever would normally show in column C for row 1180. And every time you use this something like this, it does overwrite the calculations that are in your column cell. Let's scroll down a little more. Now we have our cash and equivalents at the end of the period. And that's, of course, a simple sum of our printing 1210 and our row 1120 up at the top, which was our net increase, decrease in cash. Now underneath that, I've just added in 2 rows for my check totals. Now I have a check total, cash at the end of the period, and of course the difference. Now in order to get my end of period, again, I'm using an account modifier to specify what this should be. So I have this as a non-printing row, because I don't want to see it in my calculations or when I generate my report. And I have an account modifier of /Y. Let's drill into that one real quick. You'll see that your /Y stands for the year-to-date balance. So I'm going to leave that one selected. And again, I have this locked down to the account category of just cash. So in this section up here, I'm looking at my cash, the beginning balance of my cash. In this section down here, to do my check totals, I'm looking at my year-to-date cash. Now underneath it, my difference row, I'm doing a simple total, 1300 minus 1390. I want those, of course, to be 0. If something shows up, I'll get a difference. And that is what this print control of XO is telling the system. It's only going to print if there's something in the calculation itself. As long as it's 0, then that row is going to remain hidden itself. All right, so let's go and look at that now. So I'm going to minimize these. I'm actually going to go in here and generate this cash flow. And actually, I think before I generate it, I'm going to go in my column set, and I'm going to unhide these columns right now, so you're able to see the differences between those being there and not being there. So I'm going to run this because in my test system, everything happens in April. And that's what I'm going to generate this for. Okay, now here's my cash flow report showing all the columns, including the hidden ones. As you notice, as I mentioned earlier, I had highlighted my sections, so everything within those sections is highlighted, and if you don't want to see highlighting, of course, you can remove those, or you don't have to put it in the first place. So as you'll see, I have all my month-to-date information here. I have any period one balances. In my instance, I have none. I have my year-to-dates, and then, of course, my calculated year-to-date column. So you see on mine, I have huge decreases in my cash, and I have differences that I actually need to go into and start looking in my system to determine why I actually have differences. Let's see if I broke something on my report to verify that I haven't done anything odd. Oh, that's good. Okay. Of course, as I said earlier, we'll go in here. And I'll remove this highlighting. There we go. Which is pretty simple to do, actually. And you get rid of that as you need to. But I'm going to go in actually and rehide these again. Now I can regenerate my report. Now I also want to generate this report again for previous month. And of course, you notice I removed my highlighting, but I did not save the changes, so they've shown back up when I'm generating my report. So now I've got a March report, and of course I have my April report. But again, my calculations are now hiding. I'm only seeing the data I want to see. And now what I have to do is go in and figure out where my differences are coming from and why I'm not getting a good balance. Now I will say in my instance, I did some posting right before I generated this report in my assets. So of course, know that I probably need to go back and check my assets and see if something's posted incorrectly in that particular section, which is where these additions are at. Because previously, that was coming in at 0. So I would start looking there to see if I've got some information there that's incorrect, causing these differences. Tina, do you want to jump in with?
The one thing that you might want to show is in the report definition, the switch in the settings section. where you have to switch it to, can you go to settings there?
Absolutely.
There on the left, calculation priority.
Yes.
That is part of the key to making this report work.
That's perform column calculation first and then do your row calculations, as opposed to performing your rows first and then the columns.
Correct.
And actually, pardon?
It defaults to the second one, perform row calculation first.
That is correct. The system normally will do everything that happens on the row first, and then it will do any calculations in your column definition. But in this instance, you want the columns to calculate prior to the row calculations. And this is actually used also on some reports if you're trying to do totals and you're using percentages on your reports.
Yep.
In order to make your column percentages come out correctly, you'll need to do column calculations first and then the row calculations.
Correct. The other option that you might look at is when there's a difference, as in this report, in the row definition, if you unhide the rows that you've hidden to validate the numbers that are being pulled in.
Let me pull that up real quick here. We'll get that done too. Let me go ahead and unhide, get rid of all this highlighting I've done here. Save that, so that'll get done. And as Tina was saying, I can come in here and I can hide all of my non-printings. I can save that again and regenerate the report. And we'll run it back to April again. I'm going to close this one in the middle. So I have my two here. Okay, so I've got both of my April reports. So I can pull it down. And it has now, it's unhidden the rows, as opposed to on this side where I did have those rows hidden. So this is actually going to give me, have quite a few things that I'll need to look at to determine why my cash is out by the, with a huge difference of $115,000. Now, granted, some of the things I have to keep in mind in my system is that Management Reporter actually, in this test system, uses my test company, the Fabricam company, which, if you've ever been in, you know is broken and has lots of issues. So sometimes our reports don't turn out the way we would like them to right away, but I think you'll probably have a lot better luck with yours since all of your data is more correct than mine is.
At least I hope so, right?
Yes, yes. So this is just a small example of how you can do your cash flows. Of course, now mine is a fairly simple one. Yours may be much more complex than mine is. And cash flows can actually take a little bit of time based on how much data, how your chart is set up, how much data you're actually wanting to pull into the report. And of course, if you decide to go with a direct method in your operations section instead of the indirect method, that can of course require a little more work also. Okay. Tina, do you have something you'd like me to go through? You can think of that everyone might like to see also?
The only other thing you might do is talk about how you can reconcile this against the other two reports.
Well, I'm afraid mine won't reconcile anywhere, but you can use but your operations section, you should be able to use that to reconcile back against your income statement or your P&L when you generate those from the report. And of course, you can also check some of your balances, especially like in your financing activities, your stocks sections, everything like that, against your balance sheet itself. But you should be able to arrive back at these same numbers when you're looking at this report and using your P&L and your balance sheet as you generate those, of course, for the same period. Try and think of, I think we might have used our balance sheet default in the instances that we were running through before. And then, of course, we can also use my P&L, which I no longer see.
There's an income statement default.
Ah, thank you.
Sure.
And then, of course, thank you. I appreciate that. I can generate my income statement. I can use both of those to compare the numbers against. And of course, now you always have to make sure you're going to run these for the exact same period prior to trying to do any comparisons. And you may also want to run these. Let me go away for just a moment. Let me get back to my cash flow real quick. When I generated these reports, I generated them for a financial and account detail level. So I'd actually go into these reports, and I'm going to be able to actually drill down from these reports, so to get me a little more information about what's going on behind the account and help me try to figure out what may be incorrect in my actual account. And that, of course, is going to apply to all of the sections, so I can drill down on my net income, and then that's actually going to break it out for me into all of the various sections, which in my instance is, of course, every account that I had loaded into my account categories.
The
Yes.
The report that Philip is using is a default cash flow statement. You can start with those templates and update the row or column accordingly. You could also copy it and then make the necessary changes. If you do not have the default reports loaded, they can be loaded for you. So that's an easy process to do.
And it'll actually have all of these reports that you see in here that are listed as these default reports will be there, and you can use those as templates for any report that you may want to build in your system. Okay. And that's our sample demo for our cash flow. Lindsay, do you have some questions?
We currently do not have any questions. If you have
Okay.
questions, either raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can put them in the question box. We'll see. Nobody has any questions. While we're kind of waiting to see if people have questions, you can definitely reach out to Tina or Philip if you have questions as you start thinking after this webinar. So their contact information will be up at the very end, but you can reach out to them for any additional questions you may have.
And if you, like Tina had said, if you do need the default reports installed so you can have these blank templates to use when you're building your own reports, those are downloadable. Anyone can assist you with installing those if you don't already have them installed. And those are, in fact, they might actually be available. Tina, do you know those are available on the Customer Source website?
I'm not sure they are. I think they may have to be installed actually from the Management Reporter software.
Okay, all right.
That's the way I've seen it done.
Okay, great. So we'll be glad to assist you with that if you'd like to install those on your system so you can have those to use for future reporting, or to maybe make some changes to some of your current reporting.
All right. Well, if Tina and Philip, you guys will have anything else, there's no questions. So I think we can probably just end a little early today. But just a reminder, if you do have questions, just reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help you.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. We do appreciate it.
All right.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day, everyone. Bye.